Hello, today I want to talk to you about carbohydrates, specifically carbohydrates for sports performance. So carbohydrates come in three really important types. There are monosaccharides, very simple sugars, disaccharides, which are made up of two simple sugars, and polysaccharides, which can be quite complex, things like starch or fiber in our diet. Okay, first of all, we need to know that carbohydrates are the best fuel for your muscles and for the brain. In fact, they're your first choice of fuel for sports performance. Carbohydrate storage provides only about 2 hours of energy at intense exercise levels. But carbohydrate in the form of fiber is absolutely essential for your health, particularly for your immune system. So we'll need to talk about these three aspects of carbohydrates for health. Yeah, so here we have them. We have simple sugars. These need to be moderated, except during competition. In competition, simple sugars can be consumed in the form of sports drinks and gels, things like that. After your sporting event, it's a really good idea to recover your carbohydrate stores as quickly as possible, and starches, things like bread or pasta or rice, are really good choices. Now, fiber is essential in your diet. Fiber is a really important part of your healthy diet to maintain your microbiome, keep your body and your immune system healthy so you can train. However, fiber needs to be moderated just before competition. Too much fiber in your stomach can prevent you performing at your best. So let's take a look at the chemistry of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates provide very quick energy, 4 kilocalories per gram. The storage in your body is in the form of glycogen, and glycogen is synthesized in your liver and in your muscles. Chemically speaking, carbohydrates have an interesting structure. They're made up of carbon, hydrogen, and importantly, oxygen in the ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. So the most important carbohydrate, glucose, has this formula here: 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. It's really important to know that carbohydrates carry oxygen with them, some oxygen with them, at the same ratio as the carbons. So that means you need less oxygen, you need to breathe less oxygen to produce energy. The net result of that is carbohydrates are your preferred fuel source because you don't require as much oxygen to burn carbohydrates. You require more oxygen to burn fats. And that provides you with an energetic advantage of around 10% when it comes to burning carbohydrates versus burning fats. So here we have the structure of glucose. You don't need to know the structure of glucose. I just want to reiterate that it's made up of 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. And you will burn this in the presence of oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water and extract energy from that glucose. Okay, back to our monomers. This is our simple sugars. This would be like glucose. And then disaccharides, usually one glucose moiety with another sugar like fructose or a galactose. And then there are polymers of simple sugars. These polymers include things like starch. Glycogen, our storage, is a polymer of glucose. Starch is the plant storage of glucose. And fibers like cellulose and other fibers are really important polymers of sugars like glucose. Here are some of the other sugars we have. So we have fructose and glucose and galactose. I've put a box around fructose and glucose because these are really the two most important fuels for your sporting endeavors. These are fuels that can be used relatively quickly. Glucose is absorbed quickly into the system, and fructose is a slower sugar to be absorbed. It has to be turned into glucose by the liver in your body. Nevertheless, fructose in the presence of glucose can be absorbed pretty quickly by your digestive tract. Galactose is slow to be absorbed and is not really a good choice for most sports. Now, let's take a look at the disaccharides. This is putting two of those sugar molecules together. There are a number of important disaccharides. I'm going to focus on two of them, sucrose and lactose. I'll cover lactose in a minute. Lactose is really important if you suffer from lactose intolerance. I will go over that here in a moment. But I want to focus on sucrose. This is table sugar. Table sugar is a disaccharide made up of one glucose molecule linked to one fructose molecule. When you digest table sugar, it is split with an enzyme called sucrase that breaks these sugars into glucose and fructose, and you will absorb the glucose and you will absorb the fructose in your small intestine. Once in the body, glucose will be can be synthesized into the storage compound glycogen. You can see that glycogen is very similar to starch. Starch is the plant storage for glucose, whereas glycogen is the animal storage unit for glucose. They're chemically very similar. So starch is very good choice to replenish your glycogen levels after competition. Starches are also pretty good sources of fuel on competition day, particularly for competition breakfast. So, you can eat starch. It will be broken down into glucose, and then that glucose will be stored as glycogen. On the other hand, cellulose is made up of glucose molecules that are very highly cross-linked, sugar molecules very highly cross-linked, and your body lacks the enzymes to break down some of these cross-linked bonds. Because of that, your body is very poor at digesting cellulose. However, your microbiome loves cellulose as a food or other fiber in your diet from plant material, and your microbiome will quite happily break down some of this fiber and provide you with some glucose from that. It is not a good choice on competition day because fiber takes a long time to break down, and your microbiome will be very, very active during that time, which can make gas and make you feel uncomfortable during competition. So fiber should be avoided during competition, but fiber is absolutely necessary at other times because your microbiome provides you about 10% of the energy you need each day. Your microbiome also provides you with a whole slew of vitamins and minerals and some very important small-chain fatty acids which help boost your immune system and provide you with additional energy. So carbohydrates are stored in the liver as glycogen. Glucose is made into a polymer called glycogen in the liver and also in the muscle. In the muscle, it provides quick, immediate energy for powering those muscles, and the liver provides glucose throughout the blood system, which can be used also to power the muscles, but also to keep your brain functioning with sufficient levels of glucose. So let's take a look at carbohydrate absorption by your body. There are fast carbohydrates and slow carbohydrates. Let's start with monosaccharides. In terms of monosaccharides, glucose is absorbed quickly by your body in the presence of a little bit of salt, a little bit of sodium. Fructose, on the other hand, is slow to be absorbed, and galactose is also slow to be absorbed, even slower. Fructose absorption, however, can be increased in the presence of glucose. In terms of disaccharides, table sugar, like sucrose, is made up of one glucose molecule and one fructose molecule, and you can see that sucrose is now a fast absorbed sugar, and that's because sucrose can be broken down into glucose and fructose in the presence of glucose is rapidly absorbed. Maltose is two molecules of glucose. It is rapidly absorbed. Lactose is one molecule of glucose linked to one molecule of galactose. It can also be absorbed rapidly if you have the enzyme lactase, which can break glucose the glucose-galactose bond here. If you lack the enzyme lactase, then lactose will stay in your gastrointestinal tract, and it will feed your microbiome, and that will make you feel uncomfortable and can give you diarrhea and other distress and other gastrointestinal distress. If you lack the enzyme lactase, and people who are lactose intolerant know this, you absolutely need to avoid dairy products for approximately 3 days, 2 to 3 days before your competition, and certainly on competition day. Polysaccharides, oligosaccharides like maltodextrin, and starches like amylopectin can be rapidly absorbed by your body, and these are also good choices on competition day. So where are you going to find good sources of mono and disaccharide sugars for competition day? And here I've illustrated some good choices for your competition day fueling. Sports drinks like Gatorade and others are an excellent choice on game day. Energy bars are also a good choice, and energy gels are a good choice. In terms of the speed with which these are absorbed, they're all absorbed rapidly. The only combination that is slightly advantageous is when they contain a mixture of glucose and fructose, usually a 2-to-1 mixture of glucose to fructose. Those products are absorbed at faster rates and to higher levels than just glucose or sucrose alone. Here are some starches. These are really good choices for competition day breakfast. Breads, bagels, pasta, oats, rice, grains, potatoes, any kind of cereal. These are really excellent choices for competition day breakfast. And you want to make sure that your glucose levels and your glycogen levels are topped off for competition because it improves sports performance. When you're training but you don't have competition, you need to take care of your health. You need to improve your microbiome, and vegetables and fruits, beans, things like lentils and other kinds of beans, whole grain oatmeal, whole grain foods like whole grain pasta, lentils, vegetables like avocado. All of these are excellent choices. These contain healthy fibers that will feed your microbiome, and your microbiome will provide you with extra energy, provide you with vitamins and minerals, and it will provide you with small chain fatty acids and things and other compounds that boost your immune system function. This is essential for health and performance. As an athlete, you need to make sure that most of your carbohydrates each day, each training day, are coming from good sources, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, beans, anything that is a good source of fiber. Okay, let's talk about carbohydrate digestion. The ultimate goal is to break carbohydrates down into glucose and to absorb that. Fructose can also be absorbed and is turned into glucose by your liver. Active transport of glucose requires the presence of a little bit of sodium, a little bit of salt, which is why sports drinks have a little bit of salt and potassium, sodium and potassium in them. The first place where carbohydrate digestion starts is immediately in the mouth. The saliva contains an enzyme called amylase, and amylase will break starch down into glucose, which can be rapidly absorbed. This happens immediately. In fact, some glucose can be absorbed through the lining of your mouth, and that hits your bloodstream straight away. So even swirling around a sports drink in your mouth can improve performance. Stomach fiber adds bulk to food, and that creates a feeling of fullness, so you want to be careful with fiber on competition day. In the small intestines, carbohydrate digestion occurs, is the main place that carbohydrate digestion occurs. An enzyme from the pancreas called amylase continues to digest starch. Disaccharide digesting enzymes will break the disaccharides down into simple sugars. So maltase will break maltose down into 2 glucose molecules. Sucrase will break sucrose or table sugar down into fructose and glucose, which can be absorbed. And lactase will break the lactose into glucose and galactose, and those can be absorbed. In the large intestine, fibers feed your microbiome. They also attract water, they can trap cholesterol, and your microbiome will thank you for all the fiber that you eat. Here we take a little look at this carbohydrate absorption in the intestines. The blood flow would be coming down here. This would be the lumen of the intestines. You can see that maltose is being turned by enzymes like maltase into 2 glucose molecules, and those glucose molecules can come down here and with a little bit of sodium be absorbed rapidly, active transport, and transported into the blood. You can see that fructose is transported via facilitated diffusion, which is a slower process than absorption of glucose. But fructose absorption is accelerated when glucose is present at the same time. Fructose passes across the intestinal wall and enters the blood. In the liver, it will be turned into glucose, which your body can use immediately. Galactose is also absorbed with sodium and transferred into the blood. Galactose also needs to be turned into glucose in your body. When we take a closer look at the absorption of glucose in the presence of sodium, we see that SGLT1 receptor is responsible for this process, and then GLUT2 receptor is responsible for transporting the glucose from inside of the cells into the bloodstream. Now, when you practice eating high glucose during your sporting events or during training, you can increase the levels of the SGLT1 and GLUT2 or GLUT4 receptors on your cells. And by doing so, you can increase the rate at which glucose will be transferred from the lumen of your intestine after you eat it into your bloodstream. By doing so, you can increase the rate at which you can fuel your body. You can fuel your body with outside glucose at quicker and quicker rates as long as you practice it. You need to practice glucose ingestion once or twice a week for at least 6 to 8 weeks to increase the levels of these transport molecules and to increase the amount of glucose that you can take in during your sporting event. So I highly recommend that during the competition phase of your year, once or twice per week, you practice ingesting the same kinds of sugars that you will ingest on competition day or race day. After exercise, it's really important to take into account carbohydrate recovery. So if you've been working out for 1 hour at a high intensity level, you will have depleted your glycogen stores by about 1/2. If you work out for 2 hours, you will have decreased your glycogen stores almost to the point of empty. It's really important when you stop exercise to replenish that carbohydrate. And there are 2 phases for glycogen resynthesis. There's an initial insulin-dependent rapid phase, and then there's a slow phase, a slow insulin-dependent slow phase afterwards. So it's really important to time carbohydrate intakes. The most important thing you can do after exercise is to immediately get carbohydrates into your system to resynthesize your muscle and liver glycogen. That will enable you to train the next day at the same level that you trained on the first day. The rate of carbohydrate ingestion is highest in that first 15 to 30 minutes after you stop exercise. And the types of carbohydrate that you consume should be relatively fast acting. So things like starches or simple sugars or disaccharides are good choices. You should be aware that protein and fats will slow down this process. So you want to be a little bit cautious with how much protein and how much fat you ingest after your workout. And caffeine will increase the rate at which you resynthesize muscle glycogen. So in fact, coffee with some simple sugars is a really good choice as post-exercise recovery. Yeah, this shows an example of immediate resynthesis of glycogen after exercise. You can see that glycogen resynthesis will proceed to maximized levels if you immediately resynthesize, if you immediately provide glucose, carbohydrate to your system after your workout. However, if you delay workout for 1 or 2 hours and then taking carbohydrate, you can see that the level to which the glycogen is resynthesized after your sporting event, after your training, is only half the level that it was that it would be if you had resynthesized and taken in carbohydrates immediately. You can imagine that if this goes on for future days and you delay carbohydrate ingestion after your exercise for a second or a third day, that carbohydrate levels will continue to decline, and ultimately your sport performance will dramatically decline. So how much carbohydrate do you need to take immediately after your exercise? I've got here 1.2 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight as soon as possible after your exercise. And that is taken from studies which have shown that taking in more than about 1.2 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight is not helpful in terms of improving glycogen synthesis post-exercise. If you take in more carbohydrates, it's essentially wasted. So more is not better. You only need about 1 to 1.2 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. For a person of my size, I'm about 70 kilos. That would be something around 80 grams of carbohydrate immediately post-training. What about lactose intolerance? Let's say you're an athlete that lacks the enzyme lactase. You have low levels of the enzyme lactase. That means that lactose, when you ingest products that contain lactose, milk-based products, dairy products primarily, you lack the enzyme that will break glucose and galactose in two. And because you lack this enzyme, lactose remains in your gastrointestinal tract. And in microbes, lactose-dependent microbes will digest the lactose, and they will turn that into gas. They will grow. They will give you uncomfortable gastrointestinal pain at times. They can give you diarrhea. People who are lactose intolerant know the symptoms and will want to avoid dairy products on competition day, or indeed a day or two before competitions. But what are the recommendations, the USDA recommendations long-term for people who are lactose intolerant? It turns out that lactose, because it feeds your microbiome, is actually a pretty healthy choice for most of us to take in dairy products and to take in some products with lactose in them. So it is recommended that athletes, even with lactose intolerance, try to take in low levels of products that contain fermented milk products. So they have very low levels of lactose. Fermented milk products would be things like kefir or things like yogurts, where the lactose has been metabolized by microorganisms in those products, and the lactose levels are greatly reduced. As an alternative, individuals who are lactose intolerant can switch over to soy-based products, or nut-based products like cashew and so forth. Soy-based products have high protein levels, so there's a pretty good choice for most athletes. it's important to look for products that are high in riboflavin, vitamin D, calcium, and magnesium. Lactose intolerant athletes tend to avoid dairy, and as a consequence can become deficient for things like riboflavin, vitamin D, calcium, and magnesium. Calcium and magnesium and vitamin D are essential for bone health, so you want to be cautious and careful if you are lactose intolerant with these vitamins and micronutrients and minerals. You want to get these vitamins and minerals into your system. Prioritize those in your diet if you are an athlete with lactose intolerance.